Now, normally, every single samurai clan history video that has been made so far has covered what can be considered a pretty large and significant family. However, that isn't exactly the case for the clan we are covering here today. In my most recent Patreon clan history poll, the clan that not only was recommended by a patron but also won the popular vote was actually the Tanegashima clan. The Tanegashima were not on their own a massive imposing power, but in fact a minor family that spent a good portion of their history in service to a larger regional authority. Still, as many of you might already know and as others will come to see, the Tanegashima are still very famous for another reason, being that they were the first samurai family to come into contact with Europeans, and with this would come a very unique development. So, with that said, let's jump in and explore the fascinating history of the Tanegashima family to see how a minor power such as they would still end up leaving behind an impressive legacy that extends to this very day. Although the Tanegashima would over the ages come to adopt the name of the island where they ruled, their actual origins are far more blurred, with several theories and stories recorded about their lineage. What appears to be the most logical answer is that the original lords of what would later come to be the Tanegashima clan in fact came from the Higo family. The Higo were vassals to the Nagoe, who themselves were a branch of the original Hojo clan. Throughout the early 1200s, the Higo would be appointed as Jito stewards for the Nagoe throughout territory in southern Kyushu, including the island of Tanegashima, where the family began to plant its roots. However, another story, believed to perhaps be an Edo period embellishment and aims to increase the prestige of their lineage, slightly changes details to position the family as descendants of none other than the great Taira no Kiyomori. In this theory, Kiyomori's grandson, Yukimori, who himself perished at the Battle of Dan-no-ura, supposedly had a son who survived the ordeal and went on to be taken in by Hojo Tokimasa, with Tokimasa being the father-in-law of Minamoto no Yoritomo, who was the victor of the Genpei War and founder of the Kamakura Shogunate. His position was set to steadily increase, especially following the death of Yoritomo in 1199, which then allowed the Hojo to assume control over the Bakufu as regents or shiken. Thus, the son of Yukimori would in time come to prosper under the Hojo, being awarded various islands to govern. But, like I said, this version of events is not believed to be accurate. In fact, it is apparent that the true origins of the Tanegashima lie with the Higo family. At some point over the following centuries, the clan would come to adopt the name of the island where they ruled, transforming into the Tanegashima we have come to know. Yet their kamon, or family crest, is believed to have remained that of the Mitsuuroko, the three scales which have become famed due to their usage by the Hojo. Following the fall of the Kamakura Shogunate in 1333, the Tanegashima obviously become more autonomous. But besides that, their history starts to become much more verifiable. Indeed, we can see that they came to assert a level of prominence that one might not have initially expected, ruling not only Tanegashima, but also having previously been appointed to govern neighboring Yakushima along with other territories throughout the area. The Tanegashima were the southernmost ruling samurai family across all of Japan, and sitting between Kyushu and the trade hub that was the Ryukyu Kingdom to the south made Tanegashima stand out as a prominent location of trade as well. Over the centuries, this served to elevate the status of the Tanegashima family, as well as making the island a popular destination of travel for those within the government, especially into the later Edo period. Yara Kenichiro of Meio University further explains the relevance of Tanegashima. The members of the Tanegashima clan often visited Kyoto, the capital at the time, to enjoy playing kemari with aristocrats, and it was not uncommon for cultural figures from Kyoto and Osaka to visit Tanegashima. Furthermore, powerful feudal lords also sent envoys to Tanegashima to deepen their ties with the Tanegashima clan. The area ruled by the Tanegashima clan was the southernmost tip of Japan, but conversely, it was the gateway to Japan for foreign ships coming from the south. The Tanegashima clan had many opportunities to come into contact with foreign ships, and it is believed they possessed many rare overseas items. By utilizing this attraction, the Tanegashima clan succeeded in narrowing the gap with the central government. And this feeds well into what we will be examining next, as we move into the Sengoku period of Japanese history. By the 1540s, the Tanegashima were under the rule of one of their most significant leaders, that of Tanegashima Tokitaka. Although European explorers and traders had arrived in Asia decades earlier, their influence had not yet arrived in Japan. That all changed, however, when a Chinese junk carrying a Portuguese trader named Antonio da Mota landed on the island of Tanegashima in the late summer of 1543, after their ship had been swept off course. Although the Portuguese and the Japanese of the island were not able to verbally communicate, the Chinese crew of the vessel were able to interpret for them. It was here that the Chinese introduced the Portuguese as Southern barbarians, or Nanban. The Portuguese had with them Western-style firearms, something Japan had not yet seen. Although more primitive firearm designs had existed in Japan for some time, designs such as the arquebus were revolutionary. Tokitaka, who was only a teenager at the time but is believed to have already taken over leadership of the family by this point, was wowed by these new weapons, supposedly paying some 2,000 ryo to purchase one of them. He immediately recognized the potential impact that these weapons could have in Japanese warfare going forward. He then ordered a trusted smith to disassemble the gun and learn about how it worked so that it could be reproduced. This was also potentially conducted with the assistance of the Portuguese, who were able to further explain the various mechanisms. Now, it should be noted that another theory suggests that Tokitaka had to give one of his daughters over to the Portuguese as a consort in exchange for the weapon and instructions. However, this version of events seems somewhat improbable given the age of Tokitaka at the time. Even if he did have a child at this young age, she would have been an infant, so it is highly unlikely. What is the main takeaway, though, is that because of Tokitaka, the Japanese first learned how to replicate the design of Western-style firearms, creating new Japanese versions that would come to simply be known as Tanegashima. Thus, we can see the name Tanegashima be used not only for an island, a family, but also now, guns. However, although this has been the story for many years, what should also be considered are more recent studies which have suggested that the wider introduction of new firearm designs in Japan might not be solely linked to Tanegashima, but also to other developments such as piracy and trade through the Ryukyu Kingdom. Thus, it has been theorized that the introduction of these weapons to Japan might have been more of a widespread event that occurred at several different points, and not just within the initial contact which occurred on Tanegashima in 1543. Regardless though, it was this first meeting which still remains a prominent focal point in Japanese history, propping up the significance of the Tanegashima as playing a crucial role not only in making this first contact, but also helping to spread these styles of firearms. Soon, these new weapons found their way into the hands of other families throughout southern Kyushu, including the powerful Shimazu. One would even come to be presented to Shogun Ashikaga Yoshiteru. Swiftly, over the following decades, guns began to sweep across Japan, seeing increased usage and further variation. If you want to learn more about the various designs of pre-modern Japanese firearms, I highly recommend you check out the video I made with Gun Samurai a few years ago. And although the original names of Japanese firearms would bear that of the island where they first appeared, eventually they also came to be known by other names such as Teppo and Hinawaju. Now, by this point, the situation in southern Kyushu was a bit of a mess. Although the prominent Shimazu held a significant amount of territory, infighting had divided their house, and many other rival clans competed for the remaining land. Despite that the Tanegashima were primarily located on their island, they still were caught up in these struggles. Throughout the early 1540s, the Tanegashima would come to clash with the Nejime clan of Osumi, who attacked and seized Yakushima in 1542. 2 years later, the Tanegashima struck back, retaking the island and, most notably, using Western-style firearms in the battle. Some believe this may have been the first time guns such as these saw usage in samurai warfare. The constant struggle in the south eventually caused the Tanegashima to grow increasingly closer to the Shimazu, helping militarily in wars fought in Osumi. In time, during the reign of Tokitaka's second son and 16th lord of the family, Tanegashima Hisatoki, the Tanegashima would fully come to serve as vassals under the Shimazu. This came with mixed results, because although the Tanegashima were now aligned with one of the most powerful clans in the region, they also were soon to have their trade restricted by their Shimazu overlords, who primarily overtook this activity. Now, although Tokitaka is certainly famous for his role in making first contact with the West and helping to spread the usage of new firearms, it would actually come to be his son Hisatoki who would come to have a much more impressive military career. As a vassal of the Shimazu, Hisatoki would come to take part in many of their campaigns throughout the final decades of the Sengoku period, fighting at Okitanawate against the Ryozoji and later in northern Kyushu against the Otomo. Following Toyotomi Hideyoshi's successful conquest of Kyushu in 1587, which saw the subjugation of the Shimazu, Hisatoki would continue to serve. In 1590, he took part in Hideyoshi's siege of Odawara, helping to bring down the mighty later Hojo clan. It is believed that during this event, Hisatoki supposedly presented some 200 finely crafted firearms to Hideyoshi himself. Some years later, during the invasion of Korea, known widely as the Imjin War, he would accompany Shimazu Yoshihiro on campaign and is believed to have contributed greatly, helping to ensure that the firearm units under Shimazu command operated at peak efficiency. Oddly enough though, it was briefly for a period of about 4 years in the late 1590s that the Tanegashima family was actually transferred off of Tanegashima by the Toyotomi government. During this time they lorded over a territory in Satsuma province. Yet by 1599, they would be transferred back to Tanegashima, although it appears that Yakushima was to remain controlled directly by the Shimazu. During the Sekigahara conflict a year later, the Shimazu would side with the Western Army. Shimazu Yoshihiro made a call to send troops to fight, and although Hisatoki is believed to have done so, it does not appear that Hisatoki himself was directly involved in any major action during this time. Of course, we know that the Western Army would lose at the Battle of Sekigahara, yet the Tanegashima were allowed to retain their control over the island. They, along with the Shimazu, were not displaced or destroyed like several other Western Army clans were after their defeat. In 1606, just entering into his 40s, Hisatoki, with the help of a monk by the name of Nanpo Bunshi, would put together a document called the Tippo-ki, or the Gun Chronicle. In it, the document describes the arrival of Western-style firearms in Japan and the role Hisatoki's father, Tokitaka, played in helping to understand them as well as manufacture new Japanese designs. It is believed that Hisatoki saw the Tippo-ki as a work done to honor the life and legacy of his father. Moving forward though, surprisingly enough, despite their close proximity, it does not appear that the Tanegashima played a major role in the 1609 Shimazu invasion of the Ryukyu Kingdom, a conflict sanctioned by the new Tokugawa Shogunate and which saw the Shimazu seize control of Okinawa and the surrounding islands. Hisatoki would later come to die around 1612, the last great lord of the Tanegashima family. At the time of his death, Hisatoki did not have a male heir. Yet, it was soon discovered that one of his concubines was pregnant. She ended up having a son who would become the 17th head of the family, Tanegashima Tadatoki. Due to their distance along with the age and irrelevance of Tadatoki at the time, it does not appear that the Tanegashima played any role in the siege of Osaka, the last major clashes of the Warring Age. Yet, the clan would still carry on throughout the Edo period, and it was during this time that we can see the Tanegashima and Shimazu get closer and closer. Even prior to 1600, there had been mingling between the sons and daughters of both houses, seen through marriages and the taking of concubines. And this was only set to continue over the peaceful years of the Edo period. Many figures began to have a lineage that spanned both families. Eventually, by the fall of the Bakufu in the late 1860s, it does not appear to be clear, at least in the sources I was examining, how much the Tanegashima were actually involved. With the Shimazu-ruled Satsuma domain being a major player, however, it would be logical that to some degree the Tanegashima played a role in the Boshin War. Yet from what I was able to find, the extent of their support might have only been financially. Although later, it does appear that there was a figure within the family by the name of Tanegashima Hikonojo, who fought and died during the Satsuma Rebellion of 1877, leading troops on the side of Saigo Takamori. Interestingly enough, as the new government came to rise with the Meiji Restoration, the Tanegashima don't seem to have been initially considered to be part of the new Japanese aristocracy. Despite their unique role in Japanese history and support during the Boshin War, they were not granted entry into the new Japanese peerage system known as the Kazoku. The 27th head of the Tanegashima family, Tanegashima Moritoki, supposedly continued to petition the government to right this wrong. He was not successful until roughly 3 decades later, when finally, in the year 1900, he was at last made a baron under the new system. Yet, their story does not just stop there. Years later, a descendant of the family, Tanegashima Tokiyasu, would come to play a significant role in the development of jet aviation during the Second World War, designing the Nakajima Kika, Japan's first turbojet-powered aircraft. It only ever made it to the prototype phase of testing before the war ended, and after the war, the design would be taken back to the US where it was further examined. Years later, Tokiyasu would express great remorse at the actions of the Japanese military during the war, particularly in regards to kamikaze pilots and their affected families. To this day, the Tanegashima still live on, with an impressive legacy dating back centuries. They were the first to make contact with Europeans, the first to begin creating new firearm designs after the arrival of guns from the West, as well as fighting through crucial battles at the height of the Sengoku period. In centuries to come, they remained an active force, aiding the imperial loyalists during the Boshin War and fighting hard to be recognized by the government for their achievements over the years. But they were not done yet, as a member of their own family would help to design one of Japan's first ever jet-powered aircraft. The story of the Tanegashima is one of ingenuity and perseverance, carrying on into the future while leaving behind significant marks. If you want to have a say in which samurai family gets chosen for the next clan history video, consider supporting the channel on Patreon, where you can not only vote for, but also give me recommendations on which clans I cover. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell if you enjoyed this video and found it to be most informative.